Hello, everyone. We're just going to start by reading this land acknowledgement statement. We now acknowledge the sacred land on which the University of Toronto operates. It has been a site of human activity since time immemorial. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. The territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabe and Ally Nations to peaceably care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. To overcome systematic and institutional violence, we must come together on this day and work to center our narratives, worldviews, and perspectives of Indigenous peoples in our collective decision-making for social justice, equity, and reconciliation. As settlers on the Credit River, we directly benefit from the colonization and genocide of the Indigenous peoples of this land. In order to engage in resistance and solidarity against the past and present injustices inflicted on the Indigenous peoples of this land, it is imperative to constantly engage in acts of awareness and decolonization. We also now pay respects to the Indigenous elders and ancestors of this land and to those who may be here with us today physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Thank you. All right, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jesse Berlin. I'm one of the co-presidents of the Cognitive Science and Artificial Intelligence Student Association, CASA. We're the course union for the CogSci program here at U of T, and we're all undergraduates. So that means that this whole conference has been organized from top to bottom, from selection of speakers to picking the room, to getting all this food, to selling tickets. All of it has been done just by undergrads from top to bottom, with some guidance from some faculty members as well. And yes, welcome, of course, to this event as well. UTism, the University of Toronto Interdisciplinary Symposium on the Mind. It's our biannual conference. It runs every other year, and the title this year is Work in Progress, the Cognitive Science of Development. I'll be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit more about CASA, and Donald can talk more about UTism in a minute. Like I said, we're the course union for the program, which means that we represent students in cognitive science to the faculty, to the university, to other student groups, and at events like this as well. In addition to events of this size, we hold a number of different other kinds of events, including many different kinds of discussion groups, reading groups. We have a social at the end of every semester, which is very well attended. We're just a great bunch of people. We've got an office in UC. We also have a website, cogsci.ca. So if you're around after this conference, after this weekend, come by some of our events. They're open to the public, so it'll be a lot of fun. And then last couple of things, I'd like to thank all of you who've worked on this conference, including Daniel Gregg, the conference organizer. I am not the conference organizer. Simon, the other assistant organizer, along with me. Elizabeth Long and Jean-Claude Ting, the volunteer coordinators. And the rest of the organizing committee, Kashayar Zayani, Ramina Farhang, Eugenia Anchikova, Sarah Thickett, and Sila Elgin. I'd also like to thank the speakers, all the session leaders, some of whom are actually sick, so we've had to get some new ones. All the volunteers as well, our sponsors, who are, you can see in the program, and also all of you attendees for coming out, because this would not happen without you being here. And also just a couple of quick programming notes. This event is being recorded, so that means if you don't, it's being recorded and actually put up on YouTube. So if you don't want to be up on YouTube, you're not going to be able to ask a question during the question periods after the talks, because those will be recorded as well. We also have someone from the varsity taking photos. She'll make herself known if she's taking a photo of you, so if you don't want your photo in the varsity, that's the student newspaper here, you can just wave her off. Lastly, we have a metal bowl outside which is for questions for the panel. At the end of each day, there's going to be a panel with that day's speakers, and we're going to be picking out questions from that question bowl and asking them to the speaker. So if you want to ask something to the panel, write your questions down, preferably before the coffee break, right before the panel, but at lunch, anytime when you go out and get coffee or whatever, you can put your questions there. And that's it. I'd like to now, for the proper opening remarks, I'd like to call up Donald Ainsley, the principal of University College, which the Cognitive Science program is hosted at, and also a professor of philosophy.
Thank you, Jesse, and welcome everyone to the 7th Biannual University of Toronto Interdisciplinary Symposium on the Mind, or UTism. I want to say a bit more about how important the students are to the Cognitive Science program. Those of you who have an institutional memory will know that the Cognitive Science program was founded at University College in the 1980s. An interdisciplinary program drawing on faculty from the departments of computer science, linguistics, philosophy, and psychology to investigate the mind from the many different perspectives which shed light on it. In the mid-2000s, the program was struggling somewhat, and eventually my predecessor at University College thought it made sense to close the program down. The reason the program survived is really because of the students who have such passion for the subject and have shown such commitment to it. So when they go to the dean and say, no, this program is too important, it can't be closed down, they can point to things like this seminar that's been going on now for, something like a dozen years, and its strength and the fact that it draws on such a large audience, that it's entirely organized by students. It really is a symbol of how impressive the cognitive science students are. I've worked with lots of student groups in my role as principal, and I must say the cast of students stand out for their vision, for their energy, and really for their intellectual commitment, because I think the cast of students show U of T students at their best, students who are coming together, learning from each other, but really wanting to have an intellectual experience, not simply a social one. I know the cast of students have a good time, there's no doubt about that, but they also are constantly learning from one another, and that to me is truly an inspiration. As a result of the interventions of the students, the 4 departments that have a stake in the field of cognitive science came together and found a way to make sure that the cognitive science program was sustainable. And it eventually, in a year or two, became stronger than ever with incredible numbers of students. And it made sense for University College to reassume its role in the program, and we're very pleased to have done that. It's been just great working with the cognitive science students. So this year's conference takes the theme of cognition in development with this great title, A Work in Progress. And I want to add my congratulations to Daniel Gregg and the organizing team for putting together such a great program. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot over the next few days. As Jesse mentioned, I'm a philosophy professor. My own work focuses on early modern philosophy, 17th and 18th century, particularly those philosophers we now think of as predecessors to cognitive scientists. So people who were starting to use this new scientific method to make a systematic study of the mind. And you see in their work the difficulty that development poses. So some of those early philosophers, someone like Nicolas Malebranche in his Search After Truth, he engages in kind of a speculative developmental psychology. He thinks about the development of the fetus in the mother's womb and various contingencies that might happen there. So she's startled by a snake, and that imprints it on the brain folds of the infant. And because the infant's mind is correlated in this kind of rationalist philosophy with the mind, the infant grows up to have a fear of snakes. And indeed, one of the things Malebranche thinks happens is that every one of us, when we go down the birth canal and we see the bright light for the very first time, we're scared and we're shocked, and it has an influence on our mental development for the rest of our lives. Maybe not the best approach to developmental study of mind. We'll learn more about how to do it properly today. My favorite philosopher, David Hume, the one who's probably the closest to what we now think of as cognitive science, despite his taking this approach, but despite his taking an empirical approach to studying the mind, says almost nothing about development. It's actually kind of interesting how little he says about mental development. And I've speculated in my own work as to why he thinks the kind of study he makes of the mind won't shed light on the question of the emergence of the mind in the development of the individual. In particular, the kind of observations that he thinks are required to make claims about the mind themselves depend on the emergence of certain patterns of thinking that only an adult or a relatively developed human being will have. And so the kind of access we have to the mental states of the very young, the infants, are just not, it's not possible to make the kinds of observations you need to make claims about how we get to the point where we can observe anything, either the world or the mind. So I'm really interested in learning more today about how contemporary cognitive scientists solve this problem. How do we really make progress when trying to explain mental development? I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward to it very much. Our first speaker this morning will be Professor John Vervaeke. He's an assistant professor teaching stream in the Department of Psychology and in University College. He's been an absolutely crucial member in the cognitive science program for many years, and has been teaching our year-long intro course to cognitive science to great effect. I'm sure everyone here knows him. So I'm going to call on John. He's going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then I'll be back to moderate some Q&A, and then we'll go directly into our second speaker, and I'll say a bit more about her at that point. John.